have an artist from Texas A&M Kingsville, Professor Santa Barraza. She's a native of Kingsville, Texas. Santa Contreras Barraza is a contemporary Chicana Tejano artist who was professor of art at Texas A&M University, Kingsville. She formerly taught at the School of Art Institute of Chicago and Penn State University at University Park. She received her Bachelor of Fine Arts in 1975 and her Master of Fine Arts in 1982 from the University of Texas at Austin. Her artwork has been widely exhibited in the United States, Mexico, Italy, Spain, and Germany. Her vita reflects a career replete with rewards, appearances and lectures, exhibitions, and publications. Her artwork is the permanent collections of the Museum of Texas Tech University, Mexican Museum in San Francisco, Del Mar College, Fondo de Sol Museum, South Texas Museum, Ola Museum at Bates College, the Hispanic Latino Archives of the Thomas Ibarra Fausto Collection at the Smithsonian, and I know I said that wrong, Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., and among many others. We are very, very lucky to have Professor Barraza here with us today, and thank you so much for coming out.
Good morning, thank you for coming. Can you hear me? I think you're going to have to stand over there to see it because I don't know what is in view on the screen. I'm a professor from Kingsville, but this summer I was in Austria and we actually had a show at the University of Vienna in Austria this summer. And I was invited for a conference in the Borderlands that happened in Vienna and also in Budapest. And what's really exciting is when I went to Budapest, which is right across the border, it's about borderlands and borders, there was a Frida Kahlo exhibition going on. So I got to see a Frida Kahlo exhibition, which was very exciting. So I highly encourage you. We have study abroad programs. This winter session, we're actually going to Peru, Cusco, Peru, study abroad program for 3 credit hours. So I hope that maybe you can join us. But we also have study abroad programs in France and Austria, Spain, everywhere. And so I hope that you can come and join us in one of those particular programs and transfer your credit. Okay, I'm going to move over here so that I can see what I'm doing. I was born and raised in Kingsville, but I'm like 5th generation Mexican American, but we were part of the Indians that actually occupied Managorda Bay, which is not far from here. We were Karankawa Indians, and we were occupied by colonization, by the Spaniards, and then eventually by the English. But so I'm what is called the hybrid, the mestiza, the mestizaje. So I use my heritage and I use my culture in a lot of my work. And I highly encourage you to do that because it gives you a sense of self-worth and it gives you a sense of belonging and a sense of who you really are. When I was in graduate school and undergraduate school, I went to the University of Texas in Austin, and there were hardly any information on Mexicans or Mexican Americans. I studied art, and the only art history that we studied was modern Mexican art. We also studied South American art, European art, Western art, but we really didn't study anything about us. And so I started to look at imagery that I could actually use, but there wasn't any. So I started looking at my family. And when I went to graduate school, one of my professors, I wanted to do a PhD in art history because I was very excited about art history. And I was told, well, what do you want to do? And I said, I'd like to get a PhD on Chicano art. And they said, that doesn't exist. And so by them telling me that it didn't exist, it was like them telling me, the professors, that I had no validity. So I tried to validate myself. So I started looking at the heritage of my culture, interviewing my grandparents, my parents, my aunts, my uncles, and I found a lot of interesting information. So these are some of the original drawings that I dealt with when I was looking at my iconography. For example, when I was a grad student, I was already married, and I have my daughter, so the little girl is my daughter. Andrea, she's now a professor also at Texas A&M Kingsville. She teaches language literature, English literature. And then the one in the center is actually myself and my mother from a photograph that I had of my mother. And then the one at the far end is the one that deals with a little girl looking into her iconography or her history or her heritage. So questioning her well-being and her philosophy and her heritage living in this country in what we call the borderlands. Some of the information that I found out from my grandmother was that we had family members that had done reverse migration. My father's 96 years old. He actually lived, he lives in Kingsville, and he was in World War II. But his father did what was called reverse migration. They come from a family from the Kennedy Ranch, which is in Sarita, Texas. And my great-grandfather, Teofilo Barraza, was a surveyor that surveyed the estate between Mifflin Kennedy and Richard King, and he divided the estate between the two ranches. So they've been there since the 1800s, and so there's a lot of history in the family. And so, but however, when World War I broke out at the turn of the 20th century, the family did not feel that they should fight a war that they felt was not their war. So a lot of the Mexicans that lived in Texas and also in Southern California did what was called reverse migration. So they went from Texas back to Mexico. And there were caravans of people going back. And I remember my great aunt telling me stories. She said it took them like, I think, 2 months to get from Sarita to Matamoros. And they were going in wagons, and they had all their ganado and all their cattle with them. And so it was a very exciting story. So I started, and then I started looking into the family, and then I found out that was on my father's family. But then he married a woman that he met in Matamoros, but her family had done reverse migration too, and they were from Brownsville. And then she talked about how, that was my grandmother, and she talked about how her brother joined Pancho Villa, and they fought in the Mexican Revolution of 1910. So I became very interested in the Mexican Revolution and started looking at photographs of the Mexican Revolution and doing artwork based on that. And I found out that women and children were called Adelitas. They were the women soldiers that fought in the battle of the Mexican Revolution. And I started doing artwork based on that. So these are some of the imagery from Agustin Casasola, was a photographer that documented the Mexican Revolution of 1910. So I took some of those images and used them in my work. So I became very interested in, at that time when I was in graduate school, there was a lot of feminism, and I was very interested in the role of women in society and the role of women in art. So I became very interested in role models, and I started using artwork of, the very first one is Emma Tenayuca on the far left, your left, and she was an activist from San Antonio, Texas. She was also a communist, and she led the first labor right movement for workers in the pecan shelling business. At that time, I believe that they were receiving like 10 cents, this is the 1930s, they were receiving 10 cents an hour to shell the pecans. And they went on strike because what happened is they lowered the wages to like 5 cents an hour. So they went on strike, and so she was ostracized from society, and eventually she had to go underground, and then no one heard about her. But then in the 1980s, Dr. Emiliano, what is his last name? He's a professor at UT Austin, but he actually studied in Kingsville. He wrote a book on her, and he found her, and she was still in San Antonio, and she had gone into the education system of the Catholic Church, and she was a teacher. So her name was Emma Tenayuca. So I did another painting of her, the middle one, and I used the imagery of I became very interested in Mesoamerican art history. When I was a student at the University of Texas, we had some of the leading scholars in Mesoamerican art, and one of them was Barnett. Elizabeth Barnett was one of the professors. Another one was, oh gosh, I forget her name, we're talking about the 1970s. She actually was an artist. And she used to go and excavate with her father, who was an anthropologist, and they would go to South America and the Mayan culture, and they would go into the tombs and excavate. And she was an artist, and she studied art, but eventually she became very excited about what her father was doing and decoded the Mayan glyphs. So she was an artist, a painter that actually made a tremendous contribution to the art history of the Mayan culture. So a lot of these professors were at UT Austin at that time, Terence Grady, and they influenced my work. And so I became very interested in the ancient books of Mexico. There were folded accordion books, and there were basically two books. One was the sacred history of ancient Mexico, and they believed that there were 13 days in 1 week, and their calendar was more accurate than our calendar. So what I did is what they did, and I can't get this to point, This is day 1, so you have one dot, and they were in doubles. This is daytime, nighttime. Day 2, and it goes all the way to 13. And then they would have symbols that are actually related to the calendar, and then the things that happened in that particular week. So when you looked at one of the pages of their books, you could see everything that happened in that 1 week, in that one day, morning. You could see everything, and it was like incredible. You could see what day, if it was in the morning, of what day, of what month, of what year, and they used animals and glyphs to actually identify that. So I took that idea and used it in a contemporary fashion. So here you see, for example, you can see in the first panel, there's a half moon. That is the moon goddess. Her name was Coyochalti, and she was a female warrior in ancient Mexico, in the myths of ancient Mexico. So I used it a lot in my work. The last figure is Rigoberta Menchú, who received her Nobel Peace Prize winner of 1995, or maybe it was 1993. I met her in Chicago when I taught at the School of the Art Institute. She was very tiny, like about 5 feet tall. And I remember that my friends who had organized, the University of Illinois brought her. And I remember that she had they spoke Quechua. And so I must advise you, those of you that are in college, and all of you are, or those of you that are in high school, when you have the opportunity to take foreign languages, take them. Because when I went to Europe and I went to Germany, I had a show in Germany, all of the people spoke to me in English, but they knew Spanish, and better Spanish than I did. And they knew English, and they knew German, and they knew French, and they knew like all these languages. And we don't know any of those languages. We've been so much colonized. So I advise you to take languages. Because when I was a student at UT Austin, I had the opportunity to study Quechua, the language Quechua of the Mayans, and I never took it. And so I now regret it. So I think that you need to take advantage of these opportunities. So one of the things that happened with Rigoberta Menchú when she came to Chicago, she was very tall, very small, just like 4 feet 10 inches. And she said that she was invited all over the world, but she went to Chicago because the students invited her. And she said, and she had a translator, and so she would speak in Spanish, and you have to be mindful that she did not know Spanish. She had to learn Spanish, but she knew her Mayan dialect. And then she learned Spanish, and she knew a little bit of English, but not much, so she had a translator. So when she was talking, she told them, you are the future of the world, so you can make a difference, so that's why I came to talk to you. And so, and then she said something else, and the translator translated it into English, and she looked at the translator and she said, that's not what I said. And she said it in English, and everybody started laughing. So she knew what she was saying in English, but she didn't want to use the language. So I encourage you, take languages, because you need them. When you become a global citizen and travel all over the world, you need those languages. And even if you want to go into a PhD program, you need foreign languages, because a lot of the scholars have to read French, you have to read German, you have to read Spanish, and if you don't know it, you're not going to get anywhere. So anyway, so that's my recommendation for you. Other paintings that I did, these are some of the women soldiers, and I did what is called retablos also. Retablos are these little paintings on metal, which is another popular art of Mexico that was brought in by the Spaniards, and then the Mexicans picked it up and they started painting on the metal. And by the way, Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera were big patrons of this type of art, retablos, and they actually had collections of these paintings. And if you know the work of Frida Kahlo, and if you read it in her books, read up below the description, it'll say oils on metal, because a lot of her work is on metal. So these are the Mexican women soldiers. The one on the far right was from Nicaragua. I became very interested in the Virgin of Guadalupe because when the immigrants come from Mexico to the United States, they carry her as a patron saint. They have what is called an estampa. An estampa is like a picture of the Virgin of Guadalupe, and then what they do is they carry it on them, and when they get across the border, they cross illegally, those that cross illegally, and when they're here, then they hire an artist to paint a retablo. And there's two types of retablos. There's one called a retablo de santo and retablo de ex voto. The retablo de santo is just like a painting of a Christ image, a Madonna, a saint. A retablo de ex voto actually documents the history. So you have the painting, and you have the story of what happened So what would happen with these immigrants that would come in from Mexico, when they crossed illegally and they were here successfully, they would paint the story of the trials that happened to them, and then they would take it to the church and offer it as an offering of a miracle that had occurred for them. So that was very exciting. So I started painting on metal too. So I became very interested in the Virgin of Guadalupe, and I started doing a lot of research. And recently they've done a lot of research on her. I don't know if you know the story of the Virgin of Guadalupe. If you're not Catholic, you probably don't know. But this was a woman who they say was the Virgin Mary that appeared in Lake Tepeyac in Mexico City, like in 1531 or 1532, 12 years after the conquest of Mexico. Mexico was conquered in 1519, so 12 years after that, she appeared in this Lake Tepeyac. And she told everyone, she saw this young, well, he wasn't that young, he was in his 50s, Juan Diego, kept seeing her, and she told him, go and tell the priest that I want a temple built here, a church in my honor, and I will answer people, for them to pray, and I will answer their prayers and their needs. But the bishop did not believe him. So he told him, bring me a sign. So he kept avoiding her. And she finally went down from the hill and said, why are you avoiding me? And she says, because the bishop doesn't want to listen to me. He wants a sign. I need a sign. So she said, go to the bottom of the hill, pick up these roses that are growing there, put them in your tilma, he had a shawl, and take it to the bishop. But don't let anybody see it. So he went, and when he opened his shawl, these Castilian roses, which were not supposed to be growing because it was in December. She appeared on December the 10th, the 11th, I think, or the 8th. Who knows? Somebody knows. The 11th, right? But anyway, so when the roses fell out of his tilma, the image of the Virgin of Guadalupe appeared on his shawl. And that is what is in the Basilica of the Virgin of Guadalupe in Mexico City. And people have tried to destroy it, but they can't really destroy it. And so it's over 500 years old, and it looks as good as new. And what's really interesting about it is they have taken some of the fabric from the tilma, her image, and they've done scientific studies. And one of the things that they discovered is that her image doesn't even touch the fabric. It floats like 1/8 of an inch over the surface. It doesn't even touch it. They don't know what the chemistry is of the paint that was used. It doesn't exist. Also, the fabric of his shawl, where it is, was made from this thread from the maguey plant. And I use it a lot in my work. I see it as a resurrection plant, magical plant. You can make food, you can make mezcal, you can make tequila out of it, you can make clothing, you can make books, you can make fiber. So it's made out of that fiber. So it's like this magical plant, and the image was very magical too. And recently there has been a book that I think was published by Johnson, and if any of you are interested, I can send you the information. But it's a new book where they actually did studies of the codice, of the dress, and they're saying that it's a codice. Like the codices that I use that told the story of ancient Mexico, they said that they would put it on the floor and that the indigenous people could walk around it and they could read the symbols. And they discovered that some of the symbols on her dress, like this one, well, I did my own symbols, but it's actually represents the heart, and then there are veins going up to the sky. So it's a very interesting image. So I use it as an empowerment image for Mexican Americans and for women in my work. So you see her over here also. I sort of coordinated on your left. Oops. Oh, you can't see it, but on the left I did my interpretation. These are all my interpretations of the Virgin Guadalupe, because when she appeared, she was like 15 years old, and she was Nahua. She spoke to Juan Diego in the Indian language, the Nahua dialect, and she said that she was his mother. And she heralded what is called the mestizaje, or the hybridization of the Mexicans with the Spaniards. And so I've also sort of made a correlation between her and Malinche, which is kind of derogatory, but it's kind of interesting too, because the Malinche was the mistress of Hernán Cortés, the conquistador of Mexico, and from Spain that conquered Mexico, and she bore the first mestizo of the Americas. And by the time that she was about 24 years old, she and Hernán Cortés had conquered most of Mexico. So she's a very interesting character. So I actually use a lot of her work. So you can see a symbol of the hybrid baby that she had. And she's wearing a necklace of sacrifice hands and hearts that comes from Coatlicue, the earth goddess. These are other images of, that I've done. Some are retablos, like the one on the far left, the one of Mujer con Coyochalqui. Is actually a small retablo. It's only like 8 inches by 9 inches of oils of metal. The others are larger, much larger. And this is all about taking the iconography of ancient Mexico codices and reinterpreting and appropriating it to make my own work. So the one in the center is called Nepantla. And Nepantla was, is a word that means the space between two opposing cultures, where they collide and recontextualize and a third culture emerges. And the word Nepantla actually is very old. When the Spaniards came and conquered the indigenous in Mexico, they actually slaughtered them, and they took away their religion and their culture, and they were so depressed that when they went up to them and said, well, what do you think of what's going on? Some of the wise men said, well, you might as well just kill us now because our culture's gone, everything is gone. And they said, well, what do you mean? And they said, we're in Nepantla. So it's in a state of confusion, state of collision. And so so the word derived from them. And the reason that we know that is there was a scholar by the name of De Landa who wrote the history of Mexico. He actually destroyed most of the codices. All of the codices of ancient Mexico do not exist except for 20, because they took them all and they burned them. And then when he found out that he destroyed this whole culture, he took it upon himself to actually do research and find out the history of the whole Mexico. And he wrote this book called The History of Mexico. And his name is De Landa, so you should look him up. So I was very interested in that, and this woman is actually an immigrant that's coming to the United States from Mexico, and she's so embedded in her culture that she's actually becoming part of the plant. So you see she's becoming a plant. And you can see that she's looking at the horizon and seeing the difficult mountains that she has to cross. And this is an oil painting, the one in the center. The one in the far right is La Mano Poderosa de Coyochalqui. Coyochalqui was a moon goddess, and there was a myth of how she battled with her brother. And she was defeated and dismembered by her brother, and her body parts fell to the earth. And if you go to Mexico City, there is called Templo Mayor, which is a museum where they found this rock, this stone that's about 20 feet in diameter, and she is carved into that stone and she's dismembered. So Gloria Saldúa, the writer who has passed away, wrote these wonderful stories about Coyochalqui and the borderlands. And if you don't know her book, you should buy it. The name is La Frontera, a Mestiza Consciousness. And it was written by Gloria Saldúa. Gloria Saldúa and myself and several artists and writers were invited to go and stay and work on the whole concept of Nepantla in Saratoga, California. So when I was in Chicago, I was invited to be part of this group that did research on Nepantla. So we lived together in an artist colony for about 6 weeks and did research. We did the paintings and the writers wrote about it. So it was a wonderful experience. And what she said was that this millennium that you're in is the millennium of the women. Women are going to take back the power that was taken away from them from the previous millennium. And Coyochalqui and Huitzilopochtli, which was her brother, where they had the battle, that was the battle where the sexes of the sexes. And Huitzilopochtli defeated Coyochalqui, so everything used to be matriarchal, but after she was defeated by her brother, everything became patriarchal. So these are interpretations of Coyochalqui. Some of them, you can see the woman with the green bird on her shoulder, that's my interpretation of Coyochalqui, being dismembered but falling into a body of water, becoming a mermaid, so I painted her that way. The one that's in black and white is my interpretation of La Llorona. I did a lot of research on this whole idea of La Llorona. Ana Castillo is written on La Llorona. As a matter of fact, Ana Castillo is going to be this weekend, I think, in San Antonio at Trinity University. She's presenting her writings. You should, whenever you have this opportunity, you should go because she's a really wonderful writer. But La Llorona actually comes from a very ancient myth in ancient Mexico that's called the Cihuateteo. The Cihuateteo were women that died in childbirth. So it was a woman was revered that was pregnant. And when she died in giving birth, her spirit became a warrior spirit. They believed that there were 13 levels in the heavens. There wasn't just heaven and the physical plane we're in and hell. They believed that there were 13 levels in the heavens. And you would go to the level that you lived your life with. And so the warriors would go to a very high level, and the Cihuateteos would go to the same level as the male warriors. Now the male warriors feared the Cihuateteos because when they died, they believed that the body had power. And so when the novices were studying to be warriors, the males, they would go and they would steal the body and take the middle index finger. And the middle index finger had power, and they would carry it around their neckline as a symbol of power. And they were going to battle very fearless. So they were revered. But if they died during childbirth, they went to the same level. And there was the myth that the son, when it was born in the morning, was carried on by the male warriors. And in midday, the female warriors would take it into the setting sun, because the Mesoamericans were sun worshippers. So they believed that they were the children of the sun. And so they would carry the sun as it went down, and then it was reborn in the morning, and the female warriors would carry it. So that's a beautiful image, and I've done paintings on that also. So I was very interested in these myths, and then how it related to us at this time and age. I've done a lot of public art too, so if you go to UTSA, I've done this mural. Here it's a rotunda mural in the Biosciences building. So when the Biosciences building was being built, I was hired as one of the artists to do that, that mural. It's this one here. So I did this one with, below it is a water fountain by Alice Adams from New York City. And I was hired when I was in Chicago. And so Alice Adams lived in New York City. And so I would fly to New York City and work with her in her studio. They would come to San Antonio and work in the studio in San Antonio. But this was a design that I did. And they wanted, the Biosciences building, in this building deals with studies of the brain, like diseases of the brain and all these things about the brain. So I had to work with the scientists. And what they wanted was, they wanted something that dealt with the brain, but something that dealt with the native culture in this area, something that dealt with the Hispanic culture, something that dealt with Texas. So what I did is I went and visited with scientists, and they would show me how the right hemisphere would communicate with the left hemisphere, and it looked like this in the center. But when I was looking at the ancient books of Mexico, the codices, there was a story of how Aztlan, it talked about Aztlan, which is the homeland of the Aztecs, and they left their home, they lived in caves. They lived in 7 caves, and they left the 7 caves and went looking for their promised land. It seemed very much like the lost tribes of Israel. So, but they had a drawing, and the drawing looked just like this. So what I did is I superimposed the drawing. It looked like a tree. And from the tree, they would walk out, and they would come this way, and there were little footsteps as they went out. But it looks just like the cross-section of the cerebellum, the brain. So I superimposed the brain with the homeland of the Aztecs. And so when the scientists would come and see what I was doing, they would say, and then the center, green, like an X, that's Olin. Olin is a symbol in the Aztec culture of transformation and moving energy, like an earthquake. Transformation of one plane to another, like when you die. So it was, it's called Olin. But when they saw it, they said, oh, look, there's the DNA. So they thought it was the DNA. So a lot of the images that I have are not scientific images in the mural. They're actually from the codices. But they look very much like scientific images, which is very interesting. And then this is a mural, the middle one that we did of the Virgin of Guadalupe in Robstown. And the one on the top right is a mural I did when I taught at Penn State University. I did a multicultural class with mural making with my students, and we did about 12 murals, and this was one of them. And it dealt with the corn goddess and Zapata sprouting out from the corn goddess, and a lot of things dealing with the Mexican culture. And then the one below that is myself working. I did a mural of Madre Julia Navarrete in Kingsville. She brought the first order of nuns to Kingsville, and she has died. She died in, I believe, the late 1960s. And what they're doing now is they restored her chapel, they restored her order. She actually opened the first school for Mexican Americans, because Mexican Americans in Kingsville were not allowed to study, and so they had no way of studying. And so she opened the first school for the Mexican American kids. And she was from Mexico. She was actually from Oaxaca. And right now she's being canonized as a saint. So I was commissioned to do her mural. These are other murals that I did, but they're street murals. The far two on the left, the one on the far right is done with chalk, and it was done, as I was saying, in Kingsville, there were separatism. The Mexican community would not mingle with the Euro-American community, and this is when it was first established. Kingsville was established in 1904, and so there was an area in Kingsville called Richard Street, where they had Madre Julia Navarrete, had her school. They had all the stores for the Mexicans. They had cigar stores, they had grocery stores, they had flower stores, they had really beautiful things. But now it's in shambles. And so what I did is I asked the city if I could do this. We did it for every time her apparition, which was in December, occurs right before Christmas, I do something for the Virgin of Guadalupe. So I started doing this. So I did a charcoal drawing of her on the street. So they blocked up the street, and I got my students and another professor, Mr. Brown, Darren Forehand, and he and his students and myself and my students, we worked on this chalk mural, and we did it on the street. We did it in one day, and but the next day it rained, and so we kind of like disappeared except for her face. But what was really interesting is when, after we finished it, the newspaper, I think the television Channel 3, I think, came and did some interviews with us. So people started coming because they thought that it had miraculously appeared on the street, which wasn't true, you know. But what was really good too is that they would come and then they would see the image of the Virgin on the street and they would stop the car and they would go another direction. They didn't want to go over her. So it's very good. And then the one on the two on the far left is another one I did in Kingsville. 75 feet, I believe, by 120 feet. It was huge. It was a whole city block. And I did it with my students. And I remember we did an art exhibit of the Virgin Guadalupe, and then I wanted to do an image of her. And my students were already gone, and one of my students said, Ms. Barraza, do you really want to do this? And everybody's gone. No one's going to be able to help you. And there was one student, she encouraged me, said, well, let's go look at the places and see what we can find. And let's just look. So we went and found this place, and we asked for permission if we could do it. And the students said, we should do it, Ms. Barraza. I'll get students from Alice, and I'll get students from Alfurias, and we can do it. So we started working on it. And we worked every day since the day of her apparition, which was December the 11th, I believe. And we worked all the way until like right after New Year's. And we worked when it was raining, we worked when it was cold, and the city got so excited about what we were doing that they actually brought lights. We would work at night, we had coats. It was incredible, but what happened is all these miracles started occurring. One day I go to paint, and these white feathers just fell out of the sky, and I thought, I thought they were leaves from a tree that had fallen down, but there were no trees. It was a whole city block with no trees. First I thought, I'll pick up the leaves, and I looked down and there were these white feathers. And one of my co-workers, Daniel Cuellar, had been working on the mural. You can see him right here. It was so big, it had to be photographed from an airplane. See him? Right here? That's Daniel Cuellar, right here. So this is how big it is. And this was done with acrylics. Yeah. And it had to be photographed from an airplane. It was so huge. And so it was really interesting because these feathers appeared, and Daniel Cuellar, I told him, these feathers fell from the sky, and he says, weren't there 12 apostles? I said, yeah. So I picked up the feathers. So all these things were occurring. People would come and look at it, like couples that were married, they would come and look at it, and it was just an incredible event. One of the things that was very interesting is we were working, people would come by and I would encourage them to help, and they would start helping, and one day this young man came, and I said, can you help? Oh, he was asking me what I was doing, and I told him, and he says, I used to take some art classes, and I said, well, why don't you come and help? He says, let me go get some help, I'll bring my girlfriend. So he came with his girlfriend's sister, and his girlfriend's brother, and they started helping, and they worked all day, and they were really good. So I said, I asked one of them, were you a college student? She says, no. I said, were you in high school? She says, no. And I said, you didn't finish high school? She says, no, I didn't finish. And I said, why? And she said, well, I was kicked out. And I said, why? I said, what did your mother say to that? And she said, my mother's in jail. And I said, well, when you paint, you ask the Virgin that your mother be released from jail. The next day, her mother came. Yeah. I also do sand paintings. We did the one on the far right is a skull that we did for Day of the Dead, but the one on the far left, I did for an exhibit I had in Dallas at the Latino Cultural Center in Dallas. And then at the Benet Museum in Victoria, Texas, we did this of the two Fridas, the skeletons for Day of the Dead. These are sand paintings. The one on the left was, I think, 40 feet by 40 feet, and the other one was about, the one of the skull is, I think, 20 feet by 20 feet. The one in the two Fridas was the entire floor of the museum. And we received very good comments on the sand paintings. The sand paintings are actually done in Oaxaca, and they do it when a person dies. They actually do of a saint or a cross, and they have padrinos, godparents, for the sand painting. And it's very beautiful, it's very spiritual. They pray for 9 nights, and then at the end of 9 nights, they take all the sand and they bury it with the deceased person, because they feel that that is the way that the spirit will be swept away from the earth into the spiritual realm. So it's a very beautiful concept. So we started doing that also. The one that I did in Dallas, it has 4, that is a symbol of the earth. From ancient Mexico, the 4 leaves in the center is the symbol of Mother Earth. I just wanted to show you this. We did a fundraiser in Kingsville for the symphony in Kingsville, and they asked us to paint violins, and so I did one of the Virgin of Guadalupe. And it was auctioned off. There were I think about 20 artists that volunteered painting them. This is what I'm working on right now. I actually bought a city block, and I used the Maya Blotna architecture that you see on the far right. And I designed, with the designer, we designed this building. So I'm going to have my studio and a gallery built, and it'll be an entire city block, and I'll have a gallery, a studio, a print shop, fine art print shop, and also a frame shop. So probably by this time next year, it'll be there. So I think that's it. Do you have any questions on any of the images? Anybody?
Thank you so much for coming. At this time, we do have some refreshments. Sorry. We have some refreshments over here on the side. We have corn in the cup, and we have some cake. And also, Professor Barraza has brought some prints that she will be signing for you guys. Let me get you close to this thing. This one, I think it's Selena. Yeah. This one is of Selena, and then we have a couple of other ones. So if you want to come and visit with her. Also, if you have your raffle tickets, we are going to be raffling off 6 of her books, which she will be signing as well. And then for the counselors from the high schools, if you can see me, we are going to be giving a signed copy of the book to your school as well for your library. So thank you very much.